The first question is, what do you remember from your first few days in the United States when you arrived?
Okay. So, as I said, we just got married. We flew from Canada because that was where he's finishing his master's. We went from London to Fredericton, Canada, and then we stayed there for a while. And then we were driven to Halton, Maine by his friends to get a plane, an airline that does not exist anymore called People's Express because it was the cheapest airline. So we had one-way tickets from, oh my gosh, where was it? Providence. I want to say Providence in Maine, but now I'm not 100% sure, but it was in the state of Maine. We flew from there to Jacksonville, Florida, and then we took a Greyhound bus from Jacksonville, Florida to Gainesville, Florida, where the University of Florida is. What I do remember is we got to Jacksonville, Florida. Oh my God, I think I'm remembering this correctly. Early morning, like 5 a.m. or something.
Mm-hmm.
And the bus wasn't till about 8, 9, I don't know, several hours later. So I remember sleeping on the floor with we probably had between the two of us 4 or 5 suitcases.
Wow.
I think 4 or 5. I don't remember if they charged us. I should talk to my husband about this before I did this interview, but I remember I had at least 2 and he would have had at least 2. And he had shipped all his books. I think it's his books. He had a lot of books even in those days. He has shipped them by UPS from Fredericton, I think, to Gainesville, because he was a student. He'd been studying. He loves his books even now, and he was starting his PhD in English at the University of Florida in August. Yeah, August of 1985. Yeah.
Wow.
So.
Thank you. So who met you when you arrived?
Nobody. Nobody met us. We arrived. So we got a plane from Maine to Jacksonville, then took a Greyhound bus from Jacksonville to Gainesville. Yeah, Greyhound bus to Gainesville. And then we had to get from the Greyhound station to the University of Florida campus, where we luckily had already had an apartment, which I had been paying for. It was in married housing. They call it married housing, Corrie Village. I think it's still there. It's married housing, and I had grabbed that apartment from England from June. We remember, you probably don't know. There's no internet, no email, nothing in those days. So everything done by letter. And phone. The phone was there. It was a little expensive. Because I had grabbed an apartment for us, and I was paying for it since June of 1985, a furnished apartment, which was the best thing ever. So we got the furnished apartment, and we knew we had an apartment. So the most interesting part of that, I'm trying to remember, is so we get to Gainesville, Florida, and we know that the office that gives out the keys for the housing closes at 5 p.m. So by the time we got, it's like a 3-hour ride from Jacksonville. And so I remember I had this visual image of my husband just running on campus. I should go home and ask him. He was like, okay, he says, I have to go and get the keys. You need to call a cab and just come there. And I'm like, oh my God. Okay. And I don't know how he knew the way. He must have asked a couple of people, but it was hot. It's Gainesville, Florida. It's August. It's hot. It's humid. He just like literally ran. We were very young in those days. He literally ran to the office on that in that village called Corrie Village, which is a housing complex. And he made it just in time to get the keys. And I was with my 5 suitcases, somehow came in a taxi because he just said I had to go, and I'm in this strange new place, right? And there's no cell phone, there's nothing. And I have to somehow, I had cash on me. I'm pretty certain I had dollars on me, but I had to call a taxi. Again, no cell phone, nothing. Go somewhere and call a taxi and come with the suitcases to that place. If we hadn't made it, I don't know where we would have slept that night because we wouldn't have keys to our apartment, anyway, I haven't thought about these things for 38 years.
Yeah, thank you. So what made you immigrate to the United States?
Because my husband wanted to do his PhD at the University of Florida.
What was your first impression of the place you arrived to?
Hot, 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 humid. I just came from London, right? So, I mean, I came from England, so it's hot. And it seemed like things were like far apart, you know. London, things seemed close by, but it's like him going to that village and everything seemed far apart. And that was
So how did you feel during your first days in the United States?
first days in the United States. Well, as I said, we had our suitcases full of clothes. I think my mom was very thoughtful. She packed a couple of sheets, a couple of towels, a couple of stainless steel utensils that we use in India, like little tumblers and some spoons. I still have them actually, those tumblers and spoons.
Mm.
And so everybody was very sweet. There was a resident manager, and he was also a student, him and his wife. They took us shopping the next day. So then we stocked up with, food. The gas stove didn't work. I mean, you had to, I don't know why, but you had to physically go to the gas company to get the gas connected.
Mm.
The lights worked, but it was a gas stove. So I think that was our biggest task the next day, was to somehow go to the gas company, pay the deposit. Everything was so cheap. It's ridiculous. I don't think it was more than $50. If it was that for the deposit, maybe less. So once you got the gas, paid the deposit, I guess somebody came and connected it. And then because they'd taken me shopping, I'd bought some utensils and plates and things. And then slowly you get to know, where to go shopping and stuff. The good thing is that we know the language. It was easy.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
we
true.
spoke English, and it's English, although there were some words in some American words are different, right? But
Yes.
generally speaking, everything was easy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what were some of the biggest cultural differences and similarities you noticed between the United States and your home where you came from
Okay.
to the United
So
States?
I'll say I came from England, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to reach back as far as India, but I grew up in England. So some of the language was the same, but there were some words that were different. Okay, so I tell this story of how I tried to get, I think we were allowed to put up curtains in our University of Florida housing apartment, right? I think it must have been permissible. So I went to Sears,
Mm-hmm.
and because my husband started his degree, his PhD, and he was also teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a teaching assistant. So that's how we lived, teaching assistant. He got a stipend for that. That was for our everyday living expenses, right? And so he got busy. So I wanted to get I call them curtains one day for the windows. I went to Sears, I took the bus, went to Sears in the, I don't know, I think it's called what mall was it? Oak Mall or something. And I was talking to the Sears lady about, trying to explain to her. I think I'd measured the windows. I got such a headache. I decided we're not getting curtains because after a while, she's like, you mean drapes? And I'm like, yes, okay, drapes. I call them curtains. Well, would you want a balloon valance or a valance, or do you want pleated, or you do want this, do you want
Mm.
that? I'm like, okay, we're not doing and I walked away with a headache.
Oh.
We had already had blinds, so I thought
Mm.
that's being a little housewife, get some nice curtains. There was that. So every now and again, there's a difference in language,
Yes.
but it's not huge. I mean, that was the
Mhm.
hardest one. Like we call it quilt, but in America, it's comforter. So I had
Of
to learn
course.
some of those different things. But it's not like, you speak Spanish and then, it's not such a big difference. So yeah, so there's a little difference. What else was the cultural difference? The cultural differences were Oh yeah. Okay, so when you walk, it's the south. Well, Florida, it's hard to say, is it south or is it not south? It's not, it's southern, but there are a lot of northern people there, right?
Mhm.
Anyway, when you're walking on campus, people would say hello. Oh, hey, hi. You go out in the evening, you're walking, they say, hi, how you doing? Hey, how you doing? So people kept saying hello, and sometimes, to be honest, it was girls who were saying hello, and they seemed to be saying hello to my husband. And
Oh.
I just got married, right? And I'm looking at him going, who's that girl? Is she in your class? Do you teach her? And and he said, you need. He said they're just being polite, and I said, but they keep saying hello to you, all these girls. He goes, that's how they are here. They just say hello. In England, we don't say hello like that.
Oh.
We don't like you're walking the street, hello, 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 hello. You just, how you doing? How you doing? You walk into a bar in England, nobody like, hey, how you doing? And you walk into a bar in Gainesville, hey, what you doing? Pull up a chair. And that took me a while to get used to. Like, why are these people saying hello to me? I don't know them. It's my British reserve, you know.
Mhm.
I really thought these girls were, he knew them somehow. And
Yeah.
he had to explain to me, no, it's a cultural thing.
Yes, that's true. Are there any challenges or barriers that you think you faced the first days that you were in the United States?
Challenges that we faced first days. As I say, we probably am not a good candidate for this interview, but um, we had fun. It was pretty easy, except he was working very hard. Oh, I sometimes would get a little lonely because I was not, the biggest challenge for me was I've been working as a librarian for 6 years before I got married. And so when I got married and came over to the US, I was on an F2 visa,
Mhm.
which is a dependent visa. F1 is the student visa, and the spouse gets the F2, and I legally cannot work.
Mhm.
That was my biggest challenge because I'd been a professional woman, and so I didn't have a salary and I couldn't work. For the first 8 months, I couldn't. And then,
Wow.
yeah, so I think my biggest challenge was that not being able to work.
Mhm.
Yeah, but it was okay. I mean, I needed that 8 months to actually set up the house and stuff, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
All that kind of stuff. So anyway, it was kind of fun.
Yeah. Thank you. So, did you have any assumptions about American culture that were challenged during your first days in the United States?
It's like, oh, Americans are not family oriented. Sometimes I'll say that, oh, they're not really family oriented. And I think, where do you get that idea? I said, I have a lot of American friends. They're all very family oriented, and I mean, that's one assumption, right?
Mhm.
Somehow, and Americans are very materialistic.
Mm.
And so even my former boss, when I visited once after we'd been here a while and then we went home, he said, well, does every student has a car and they have something like tons of money and they have a car. And I'm like, where did you get that idea? I told him, I remember telling friends and people, Americans, the average Americans, let's say student, has usually works
Mhm.
and studies. And
Mhm.
if they have a car, it's because they need the car to get around.
Mhm.
It's not like it's a luxury.
Mhm.
Look at my flashy car. It's because you need a car to get
Yeah.
around.
Thank you. So, for our last question, what advice would you give to other newly arrived immigrants in the United States?
Well, depends on how they immigrated, because first you have to take care of finding a job, um, finding a good place to live. Those take up a lot of time, right, in the beginning. And what advice would I give? I would say get to know some Americans, you know. Um, don't have assumptions about them. I mean, there's good there my father always said there's good things about every culture and there's bad things about every culture. Take the good and leave the bad. Leave the good things are, I think Americans are hardworking. They're I mean, if you get to know them, then you get, I mean, I don't want to use the word assimilate, but get to know. I know Indians, for instance, who don't mix with Americans, even they're living here, but they don't mix with Americans, and they make assumptions. I'm like, you gotta get to know people first, and try to understand the host culture, right? And I don't want to get political, but this is not the America that we came to in 1985. It's changed, it's changing, but still there are very good people here. They're very good people, and they want to help you, and take what help you can get from all the good people. There are a lot of good people here. Just, and they want to help. So that
Thank
would be
you.
my advice. Yeah.